He wore the same torn shoes every day and everyone noticed. They called him poor and laughed like it was a sport. What they did not know was that every insult was a coal he planned to keep burning. He grew up learning how to make less be enough and how to make nothing into a plan. He watched how other people moved through the world, the calm way a teacher spoke, the way a shopkeeper arranged jars, the careful pitch of a salesman, and he copied those manners in secret, practicing in the mirror when the house was quiet. He wrote down small goals on scraps of paper and folded them into the toes of his shoes where they would stay warm in private, and he turned petty humiliation into a kind of training regimen. At first the changes were tiny. He learned to hold his head a little higher, to answer a taunt not with anger but with a calm face that did not give the attacker the satisfaction of a reaction. He learned to take work that no one else wanted and do it well, because excellence was a kind of currency that no one could mock away. He kept a list of skills he wanted to learn and added one new thing each month, fixing a radio, sewing a torn pocket, reading an old manual, and each small ability made him harder to dismiss. The neighborhood mocked him, but there were other voices that mattered more. His mother's steady hands, a school janitor who told him once that a man's dignity was private and only he could give it away, and an aunt who clipped coupons and called it strategy. Those people did not have much, but they had rules about how to live and how to treat other people, and those rules stuck. He learned to cook a simple meal that tasted like triumph, because it was all he could afford. He learned to mend clothes in ways that made them last longer. He learned to sleep well on a mattress whose springs poked him awake and call that sleep restorative. There was dignity in small resistances, and as he grew, that dignity braided into stubbornness. While bullies practiced being loud, he practiced being steady. Work came early and often. He worked the bakery before dawn, carrying trays of bread until his arms ached, and he worked in a workshop after school, oiling tools and learning to read the shapes of machines. He watched customers and cataloged how they bought things, who asked questions, who scowled, who left with a satisfied nod, and he copied the behavior of the ones who seemed happiest. When he had a few coins, he spent them like he was investing. A clean shirt for a job interview, a second-hand book on accounting, a small wrench that let him fix more things. He saved with a brutal discipline that felt like slow hunger. Every coin he did not spend was a brick in a house he had not yet built. The bullies kept laughing. He kept saving. Opportunity never announced itself in a grand way. It arrived as a loose thread in an old coat. A neighbor's small electronics stall needed someone to repair radios and cheap TVs, and they hired him for nothing more than his willingness to learn. He taught himself by taking things apart and putting them back together, and when something broke beyond repair, he did not throw it away. He used the pieces to build something new. Slowly, people noticed that the young man who fixed stubborn radios could also fix a stubborn problem in a business. He was reliable, he did not complain, and he thought in ways that made work smoother for everyone. That reputation grew into customers, and customers grew into regulars. He took the money he earned and did not celebrate. He invested it in tools, in a small bench, in a sign that would one day hang over a door. The turning point came because of risk and because of an idea that would not stop nagging him. He had saved a small sum and watched the same corner where people sold second-hand phones. He believed there was a market for honest repairs done quickly and priced fairly, a place where people like him and people who looked down on him could both walk in and leave with something fixed. He used his savings to rent a tiny stall, painted a sign with steady hands, and opened. The first month brought a trickle of customers and 100 small problems to solve. He worked every hour and slept on the bench sometimes, and he learned to deny himself comfort for the sake of momentum. He did not let early mistakes scar him. He took them as lessons, adjusted prices, improved signage, and learned to explain plainly what he would do and what it would cost. Word moved through neighborhoods because people trust the person who shows up and does what they promise. Slowly, the trickle became a stream. Luck and timing matter, but hard work makes one ready when luck knocks. He expanded carefully, a second employee who shared his exacting standards, a simple ledger to track who owed what, a small ad in a local paper. He reinvested every profit into tools, inventory, and the people who kept the bench clean and honest. He treated employees as partners and learned to listen. When someone suggested a discount to lure new customers, He measured the math and did it only when it made sense. The business grew not because of a single stroke of genius, but because of 1,000 small right choices repeated without drama. The boy who had been mocked for his shoes learned how to buy better shoes without forgetting why he had once needed them. The neighborhood changed with him. Kids who had once spat on his boots now lined up to learn an apprenticeship, and the same streets that echoed insults began to echo with an account called Tom's Repairs, where neighbors met and traded favors. There were failures too. A supplier cheated him once and he lost a month's profit. A fire at a neighboring stall took inventory that was on consignment, and he had to borrow. There were loans that shrank his sleep, and a rival who slashed prices to drive him out. Each blow could have been the kind that breaks a spirit, but by then he had built more than savings. He had built practices for recovery. He tightened down overhead, he sat with his team and named every risk, and they found creative ways to recoup. Those times of crisis taught him as much as any success: humility in asking for help, prudence in making deals, and the importance of a reserve that could be used as a bridge rather than spent on proving something to someone else. He learned to fail well, which is to say he learned to fail and then change the plan. As the business matured, he saw bigger possibilities. He started to think beyond repairing radios and phones. He noticed waste, perfectly good parts thrown away because they were separated from the whole, and imagined a service that could refurbish and resell with a fair price and a kind of dignity. He found investors who believed in that model, people who were tired of blatant waste and liked the idea of a local brand that did good work. Investments scaled the business in ways his hands alone could not, and suddenly he was managing people he had once served. He read new books about leadership. He hired a manager for operations so he could focus on vision, and he stayed grounded by visiting the bench each week to fix one stubborn item himself. Money grew, and with it the temptation to forget how small things matter. He resisted. He kept the habit of teaching a young apprentice at least one day a week because he knew that humility is a practice, not a one-time act. Success changed him and the world around him. He bought his mother a small house with a roof that did not leak, and a garden she could tend if she wanted to, and he paid for his sister's schooling. He started a small foundation that offered apprenticeships and microgrants to people who had skills but not capital. He refused the easy route of flashy spending, and instead made deliberate gifts that could change life paths: scholarships tied to mentorship, tools donated to communal workshops, and contracts that prioritized local suppliers. People who had once bullied him saw him on billboards and in newspapers, and that felt strange to him, not because it was sweet revenge, but because fame made private things public. He discovered that the quiet work of stable giving does more than a single dramatic gesture. He preferred the steady change of a school with a real book budget to the theater of one-time publicity stunts. There came a day when he returned to the schoolyard where he had once been mocked. He walked through doors that remembered his younger echo, and saw children eating lunch under a tree where he had once felt watched and small. He started a program there that gave students a route out that did not require luck, only work and guidance. He sat with children who had become like he had been, and he did not speak from a podium of scorn or pity. He told simple truths about saving, about learning every day, and about choosing to be steady. He taught them to fix a small radio, and then told them to sell the service at a fair price and keep the profit. He taught them also how to be kind in victory, how to remember the person who spat on their shoes, because he understood what cruelty in a child looks like, and he knew kindness could be taught too. The faces in the school listened differently than the faces that had once laughed at him. Now there was a pattern they could follow. In the quiet moments he reflected on what had pushed him forward: the insult that had burned into determination, the tiny community members who showed him another map of what was possible, and the plain facts of discipline. He did not romanticize his suffering. He knew the boy who had been mocked had been hurt, and that hurt shaped him for better and for worse. He also knew he could have been swallowed by bitterness. Instead, he chose to channel the energy into work and into building opportunities for others. Money, he discovered, can be a tool to mend what once broke you, if you use it with attention and with the intention of widening the circle of help. The old bullies passed through his life like weather. Some apologized, some did not. He met one of them years later on a train, pale and tired, and the man asked for work in a voice that had lost its sneer. He hired him to sweep floors for a season, and later trained him to read ledgers. The act was small and practical, but it felt like a final lesson completed. People can change when given a reason and a route, and sometimes generosity is the hardest business practice to sustain because it costs you first. He never saved his generosity for the cameras. He let it be ordinary and unannounced, the kind of thing that builds trust silently. He became a millionaire not because money was the point, but because money allowed him to create the structures he wished he had when he was small. A school that taught practical skills, a fund that connected apprentices with tools, and a public space where people could practice dignity. His story was not a clean arc from victim to hero. It was messy, full of debts and wrong turns and hard choices. But the through line was clear. He kept doing the small right things every day until small things added up into change. He understood at last that success without a plan to make others better is fragile, and he used his success to build a system that would make some of that journey easier for the next kid with torn shoes. When people ask him how he did it, he tells them the same simple list. Learn the skills people need, save even when you do not feel like it, make promises you can keep, hire people you trust, and give away what you no longer need to keep. He tells them to be patient and to be stubborn in the useful ways, stubborn about learning and stubborn about showing up. He tells them that insults can either be nails that pin you to a place or kindling that makes you warm enough to move on. The choice is yours, and it is a daily decision. He keeps his old scrap of paper folded in a box sometimes to remind himself of the boy who needed it. He has shoes now that do not wear through, but he understands why some mornings he still smooths the corner of his napkin and thinks of those torn shoes. In the end, he did not become rich to be proud. He became rich to be useful. He learned that dignity is less about what you wear and more about what you choose to make possible for others. He learned that the best answer to a bully is not a louder voice but a life that quietly refuses to be reduced by the cruelty of others. He learned, too, that success is not an endpoint but a responsibility. He walks the city now, sometimes unnoticed, sometimes praised, and he spends his time making sure the next boy with torn shoes finds a path that is shorter than the one he had to walk.